More than 250 experts in the traffic signals industry joined together in person to hear a range of papers here in Nottingham. These recordings are brought to you by AGD Systems, Colas, SRL Traffic Systems, Smart Video and Sensing, Vivacity and Unex Traffic.
Good morning, Nottingham. Nice to be here. You might well actually ask, what am I doing here? Because I had a fantastic send-off at last year's JCT, and I was retired. And actually, yes, I am indeed retired from Siemens Unix Traffic in my role of Head of Product Management, succeeded ably by Martin Andrews. I guess he's probably around somewhere. But I'm still retained by Unix Traffic to help in an advisory role and also to continue my ongoing TOPAS and ARTSM work. And it's TOPAS that I'm going to talk to you about this morning. Just sitting there, it just occurred to me that I'm first up, and it was actually 20 years ago, exactly 20 years ago, so at the time of the Twin Towers, that I was actually first up again at that exhibition. So it's quite a time-bound thing, but quite interesting that it was 20 years ago exactly. So I'm going to focus on TOPAS today. TOPAS has been around for a while, and it was introduced as a result, really, of the introduction of TSRGD 2016, which significantly changed the landscape for specifications and so on related to traffic products. You'll know that the Highways Agency, as it was then, ceased to maintain the specifications. Anything to do with what was called the TR2500 specifications were effectively no longer under the control of the Highways Agency. And also, very, very importantly, the type approval process, the process by which the Secretary of State authorised equipment to be placed on the road, was also done away with. So there is now no type approval of products that go onto the street. And when that was being proposed, there were some real concerns that were being raised around what that would actually mean in practice, particularly for local authority purchasers and also for the manufacturers. So for the local authority people, there would be a need really for a need for them to generate their own specifications. What would happen when a local authority organisation was trying to purchase something and they had nothing to reference? And that would mean probably that each of the local authority organisations would have to start writing their own specifications. They would have to detail what they would need to buy. They couldn't just say, I want a TR2500 controller, because a TR2500 controller arguably wouldn't exist going forward in time. And that was really considered to be an issue. Would it actually be practical for the local authorities to be able to do this? Would they have the experience to do it? Would the local authorities be able to keep up with changes in technology? We are seeing quite a lot now of things like CAV going forward. Do the local authorities have enough knowledge to be able to do that? And actually the general consensus was that, probably in most instances, not in all, but in most instances, that local authority expertise wouldn't really exist. And there's also a risk to the manufacturers, because what would tend to happen is that potentially local authorities would be able to write some specifications, certainly the bigger ones, but they would actually be different for the same type of product. So you'd have a loop detector specification from one authority, which actually was different from a loop detector specification from another. And that in its own right would create issues in the manufacturing world, not only in R&D, where actually it would be necessary for perhaps different developments to take place, but also in the tendering and other parts of the organizations, where each tender would come forward and the individual detailed requirements would have to be reviewed. So it was decided back in 2014, actually, that an organisation needed to be formed to take on the mantle of looking after the specifications and to drive them forward, and also to provide a means by which products which met those specifications could be recognised as meeting those specifications. So, actually, as you might imagine, TOPAS work started before the TSRGD 2016 came into effect, actually in 2014. And TOPAS now actually provides three main strands, if you like. It looks after the specifications, so TOPAS took on the original TR25XX specifications, rebranded them, and initially they were published literally as they stood, so it looks after those specifications. And in reality, we cover most of the traffic products. And in the papers that are in your packs, you'll see a list of the type of products in a bit more detail. Perhaps more importantly, though, TOPAS drives those specifications forward, creates new ones as required by industry and also by users, and also by government. And again, inside the pack, you'll see the structure of TOPAS is actually tripartite. So there are representatives on the TOPAS board from industry, from local authorities, and also from government. But it really is important to note that TOPAS isn't looking at just the legacy. It is looking forward. And I think Darren may just touch on one or two things going forward in the next presentation. And the last thing which is offered, which is quite central to the whole role of TOPAS, is a means to verify that products actually meet the TOPAS specifications. And the compliance process here is called registration. It's not approval. Often I hear people and I see intenders, we want TOPAS approval, please. Well, TOPAS doesn't give approval for anything. But what it actually does do is register products which are compliant to the specifications. And the process is a lot more rigorous than would have been the case under the old Highways Agency, because a manufacturer has to go to an independent technical assessor to have what we call the technical file, which is all the material around that product, actually verified to confirm that the specification against which the manufacturer is saying they want to register is actually correct. So, what about you? It says in the title, TOPAS is for you. So, I'm going to do the old teacher thing here, or the new teacher thing. Can you raise your hands? How many of you work for organisations which purchase traffic products? So that's nearly everybody. So just keep your hands up, sorry, shouldn't have, keep them up. How many of you actually work for organisations who actively specify that your products must be TOPAS registered? So actually that's a pretty good coverage. And how many of you actually, either yourselves or your organisations, actually check that when a product is being offered in response to a tender or a contract, that it actually is meeting the latest products, the latest TOPAS specifications? That's quite a different picture. So most of you ask for it, but very few of you actually check whether or not the products are registered, or registered to the latest specifications. I should have brought the questions up, actually. So, TOPAS is for you, and actually that last step is quite important. It is quite important to double-check that products that you are being offered are to the latest specification. The TOPAS specifications are continually being changed. They're continually being updated to deal with new features and functions within the manufacturing industry, but also to make certain that they align with the latest in terms of regulation. And it's actually very easy to check that your products are TOPAS registered. You should request, when you're putting your tender forward, that products supplied are actually to the latest TOPAS specification. That's very important. Not that they're TOPAS registered, but they're registered to the latest relevant TOPAS specifications. And the exact wording on the screen there is actually also in your paper, so you can use that directly. And it's quite simple that you should then, when you get the response to your tender or your contract, you should see coming back to you a TOPAS certificate, rather like the one that I've put up there. But if you're not certain whether the products are actually registered to the latest spec, it's also extremely easy for you to do a double check yourself. You can go onto the TOPAS website, easily found, you can see that on the bottom there, and just look under either the manufacturer or the product name. So if you're looking for a detector of a particular type, you don't actually have to type in necessarily exactly the name. You can just type in detector under products and it'll list all of the registered products. And what that will bring up is a list. And if, as you can see here, the product is flagged, or the registration is flagged as superseded, that actually means that the product that you're looking at is not registered to the latest specification. And then it's up to you actually what you do about that. Perhaps what you should be doing is going back to the manufacturer and asking, are they in the process of getting the product registered to the latest specification, because they have told you that it is registered to the latest specification. But it may well also be that you choose ultimately not to go with that particular product. That would be a very extreme response, I would suggest, but it certainly is an option that you would have. So it is for you. So what does the TOPAS registration actually do for you? What does it cover you against? Well, the first thing is that it does ensure that the products are compliant with the higher level and sometimes legal regulations that products that you put on the street should meet. Things like the electromagnetic compatibility, radio compatibility, and basic electrical safety. All of those things are areas where you have a responsibility as a deployer to make certain that things that you put on the street meet those regulations. And by having a TOPAS registered product, that would have already been checked. That actually they perform in a safe and predictable way. So you would hope that your traffic controller will perform in a way that you expect it to perform, that it will perform to the way that the 2500 specification defines. And by having it registered, the manufacturer will have declared that it is compliant. And if there are some areas where it's not compliant, that would also be declared, and that is also published. So it is possible to see for certain that the products that you get will perform in the way that you want them to, The other thing which the TOPAS registration does help with is to ensure a degree of interoperability. So the TOPAS specifications have what is loosely termed a glue specification, which is TOPAS 2523, which defines things like interfaces. And products that meet those interfaces will communicate with one another. And we're actually moving that forward a little bit further now with things like a new detector communication specification, working with ARTSM to come up with a more intelligent detector specification, which was mentioned yesterday at the movie user group. And the final thing is that if you get a latest registration, it does mean that your products will be performing to the latest industry standards. And what I mean by industry standards in that phrase is we've seen changes in the way that some items have delivered. I don't suppose that anybody has looked in detail at the new TOPAS 2500, the controller spec, but there are some evolving ways that things have changed within that, just to improve the performance of controllers, for example, as a result of discussions with the likes of yourselves, with industry, and also with government. And by having the latest registration, you know that those products will perform to those latest functionalities. And it is worth remembering that if you don't actually call up the TOPAS specifications, you don't require them, and the products that you have don't deliver to them, then there is a responsibility on yourself to make certain that you are defining what the product should be in terms of things like the regulations. So back to my EMC point before. And I would actually ask the question, does anybody know, or does everybody know, all the different regulations that products have to meet when they go on the street? And I would suggest the answer to that is probably not, apart from one or two exceptions maybe. So critically, the most important thing here is it will save you time during the procurement process. And I think that's a valuable quantity which we're all suffering from lack of time. And just by calling up a TOPAS registered product, you can save yourself an awful lot of time. So TOPAS is for you, as I said right at the beginning, but TOPAS actually needs you as well. So TOPAS was created for the benefit of users and also for the benefit of industry as well, but fundamentally for the benefit of users. And it will only continue to exist if you actually use it, if you continue to call up TOPAS registered products. Because by calling up TOPAS registered products, that encourages industry to go through the registration process. And that registration process provides some of the funding, at least, for TOPAS, which is necessary to allow it to carry on. Most of the work that is undertaken by TOPAS is done voluntarily, but there is a little bit of background administrative work which is paid for, and we need to be able to continue to do that. So, I guess the final message is, please use it or lose it. Very glib, but I would really encourage you to support TOPAS by, as I mentioned before, continuing to ask for TOPAS registered products. Just a final thing, we've got a TOPAS and an ARTSM stand out the front there. There's a whole range of guidance notes which are produced by ARTSM and TOPAS. Come and have a look at those if you want to. And of course, if you want the answer to the question, the quiz question, you'll have to come and see us anyway. Thank you.
Right, we have a questions and answer things. I just want to put you on the spot, actually. Due to your, what you did before when you worked for Siemens and you did all this thing, how well do you think TOPAS has worked?
I think TOPAS has worked very well, actually, and together with ARTSM, bear in mind that from an industry point of view, of course, we have a lot of competitors. Everybody is competing. But in reality, when it comes to TOPAS and when it comes to working ARTSM, which works alongside TOPAS, the meetings and the discussions we have are incredibly frank and open, and we see very little, if any, actually delineation on industry ground, on manufacturing ground. It's a very good working organisation.
Yeah, I must admit, I did find it very easy when I was working for the other firm I was with, doing for the countdown timer. It was actually explained to me very well. Right, is there any questions, please? I think you bamboozled them.
Everybody's stunned. That's good.
No? Oh, I've got to get closer to it, yeah, okay. Any other questions or no? Just about my mic?
Yeah, there's one
You're just going to show me up, were you?
I think Chris has got one over there.
Can you? Yeah, you've got to get really close.
Yeah.
At the bottom.
Is that working now? There we go. Thank you, Keith. Just from the point of view of new technology, particularly new companies who are not ARTSM or are aspiring to be bringing new and unusual and novel products, because I think we're probably going to see a few of them today and tomorrow. Would it be possible and maybe useful for TOPAS to have something like a kind of a beginner step or a level where people can put prototypes, trials, novel technology forward, have a basic specification that they can meet but without having the full requirements as a step into the industry?
Of course, one of the changes when type approval was done away with, it isn't actually now necessary to have regulation in the way that used to be the case. So previously with type approval, even if you were going to do a new traffic controller, for example, you had to go through all the basic tests and everything to get what Highways Agency at the time called trial site approval. None of that now exists. So there isn't actually anything to stop a new manufacturer, trialling something on the street without having any sort of TOPAS registration. Of course, it is up to the manufacturer and the local authority who are allowing that to happen to make certain that the very basic regulatory requirements have been covered. What the other thing is that TOPAS always welcomes new people coming in and bringing in new products, new ideas. And in fact, it's a little bit of an open door, because if a manufacturer has a new thing, whatever it is, and they feel that it could do with a specification, what we actually encourage is for that manufacturer to produce a prototype specification. It doesn't have to be in any way formatted or anything else, but the basic material. And then we'll take that forward and promulgate it in a wider way. So I think anybody who's got a new product, it makes sense to come and talk to us. Does that help?
Got time for one more? Anybody else? Okay. Thanks so much.
Thank you.